Well, hello, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Podcasting, How Conversational Technologies Are Impacting Thought Leadership and Content Marketing. I'm Carol Flagg of the Answers Media Network and, of course, HealthcareNOW Radio. I appreciate your time today. I really love this topic. I actually spoke a little bit about this at the HiTech conference in April in Boston, where a lot of marketing folks attend. But this particular event is going to dive a little bit more into this idea of conversational technologies, your Siri's and Alexa, and the impact these technologies are having on podcasting. And there's like a double meaning too to conversational technologies, because podcasting by itself, of course, as a talk format, is very, very conversational as well. So, I love that sort of alliteration. Of course, I'm Carol Flagg of the Answers Media Network. I've been in the publishing and media industry for 30 years. I actually lead the network's marketing sales initiatives for both our Answers Media Network and HealthcareNOW Radio. And I also host my own show called What's My Tagline, which you can find on our website, HealthcareNOWradio.com, or on SoundCloud or iTunes and whatnot. Answers Media Network, of course, is a series of topic-driven websites devoted to federal initiatives in the health IT, predominantly the health IT space, established in 2009, a decade ago, with HiTech Answers. And we're now 5 websites, and of course, our internet radio station, HealthcareNOW Radio, which is really why we're here today. HealthcareNOW Radio is actually a live streaming radio, and we're really not going to be talking about the online side of this today. We're literally talking about the podcasting and on-demand side. But be that as may, it's a live streaming radio station. We launched in 2012. We currently have about 20,000 listeners a month. With 25% of those actually international. And then our companion side of it, our podcast channel side of it, which is what we're really going to be talking about today, we get over 11,000 plays per month. Very robust. We've been in this space now, obviously, for 6 or 7 years. And just by luck and happenstance, we got into the audio side of thought leadership ahead of the rise and curvature of podcasting and smartphones like Siri, AI-driven smartphone, and smart speakers. So, we didn't intend to do that, but be that as it may, we did, and we've learned quite a few lessons related to this idea of using audio for thought leadership and content marketing. Our current shows, we have 16 of them. They run the gamut on topics and deliverables. All of these shows stream live on our radio station, and then have, of course, their on-demand podcast side as well. All right, enough about Answers Media Network and HealthcareNOW Radio. So in our time today, we're going to cover quite a bit. And first and foremost, we're going to look at this growth in conversational technologies, obviously. Our Siri and our Alexa, and as we're all end users, and this technology has become obviously very ubiquitous and a part of our daily lives. I think a lot of us would say it's hard to remember when we couldn't ask a virtual assistant or our AI pal a question. We're then going to talk about podcasting specifically. We're not talking about online internet radio today. We really are just focused on podcasting to drive thought leadership and engagement. We're going to look at some specific use cases, and I have a special guest joining us later on in this webinar to talk about a specific use case listed in this particular section. And then we're going to end with the challenges in getting started in podcasting, and then, of course, on the other side of that, what are the opportunities and why you really should be exploring this as a content marketer. We've got time for Q&A. We can certainly put a couple questions in there, but if not, obviously anybody can email me after the fact. All right, so let's get started here. So just from basic definition, I think we all know what this means. Conversational technology is a term that allows people to query, conduct information, transactions, get directions, listen to podcasts, listen to music, listen to shows, whatever, simply by speaking to a computer. So at the heart of the definition, that's what it is. And familiar players, obviously, is Apple Siri. Of course, Siri's been around for a number of years now. And certainly smart speakers, the Amazon Echo, which came on the playing field a couple years ago, Google Home, Apple has a product called Apple Home, and Microsoft Cortina. I put these on here because these are the 4 largest uses of conversational technology. And certainly the smart speaker segment, which is what we're going to dive right into right now, the growing segment of conversational technologies is led clear and by far by Amazon Echo. So conversational technologies use AI. It's all AI driven, and every time you use it on your phone or your smart speaker, it learns something about you. And just like true good AI does, it begins to recognize patterns and begins to make recommendations back to you. And it learns from its mistakes. And as you own your smartphones and you converse with Siri and you converse with Alexa or you converse with your Google Home, it will continue to learn. And the more you use it, the more it will learn about you, because that is what AI does. AI is a learning mechanism. It's a computer program that it is set to learn. That is its function, is to learn and to learn from patterns. And so the more you use it, the more it will recognize who you are. Much like Google does with its analytics. It begins to, and YouTube, it learns your patterns, it learns what you like, it learns what you're searching on, and then begins to give you recommendations back. And conversational technologies, think about where we've gone even from a few years from Siri, or the 4, 5, 6, 7 years of Siri, and the last couple of years with the Amazon Alexa and smart speakers. Obviously the developers of AI technology, it gets better and better. I mean, a year from now, 5 years from now, how we consume content and how we're using AI will be light years of where we are today, right? And there's this intersection between conversational technologies and podcasting. And conversational technologies are actually driving this huge increase in podcasting. Podcasting, of course, is the practice of using digital recordings, MP3s really is what we're talking about, to be played or downloaded on computers, mobile devices, played on smart speakers. And there's a lot in the world going on right now how podcasting is really the next step from blogging. It is the new blogging as far as getting content thought leadership across. Podcasting is taking, from a content leader standpoint, a bigger role every single day for content marketers. And so I'm focused in on the Amazon Echo because they just dominate the market as far as smart speakers go. Some of that's really related to the fact that they really were the first. Some of it relates to the price point of Amazon and the sheer the volume of options that they offer for your Echo. And Amazon, of course, pretty much, I guess, rules the world these days. So anyway, they dominate the marketplace. And they've gotten better about how to play a podcast on a smart speaker. And this is, of course, all driven by the user, meaning, we're podcast publishers, but we can't, as a company, get our podcast played on every smart speaker across the U.S. Not that we wouldn't love to do that, but the smart speaker, unlike Siri, which accesses internet things, right? And Alexa does too. It can access internet things. Like if we ask Alexa to play our radio station, the internet side of it, it will stream it live right away because it's a stream. It's an internet engaged content, media content, where a podcast, if you think about it, is like a closed loop. It's an MP3 file. It resides as a single file. And so when you're playing a podcast, on your iPod or on your smart speaker, you're just gonna, if you want to play a previous one in the show, you can say previous, you can say next, whatever. But it's a standalone file format. So Alexa and Siri and our conversational technology devices, they need help from the end user to find us, right? No matter who you are as a podcast publisher, you have to give your end users the education on how to find you, and all of that is driven by an RSS feed. So if you're already podcasting, you know that you're podcasting on some, you're publishing on some sort of podcast platform, SoundCloud, Libsyn, Blueberry, there's lots of them out there, and all of them have an RSS feed, and it's that RSS feed that drives this whole process of being able to find your podcast on a conversational technology method, right? Ask Siri to play, ask Alexa to play, right? So that's where it starts. And once you as a podcast publisher understand that, you can then start educating your market, your audience, on how to find you, because trust me, you want people to listen to your podcasts not only on their smartphones and in their cars, but on smart speakers. Because as we were saying, before I talk about that, and they give you tools for doing that. So if I have an Alexa and I say, Alexa, launch AnyPod. And so AnyPod is an Alexa skill. If you're at all familiar with an Echo, you know that there are all these skills that you download for free in your Amazon store. One of these is called AnyPod. There's another one called MyPod, and you download the skill. You ask your Echo to launch a skill. It launches a skill. And you can then put in the skill from a podcast standpoint as many streams as you want. It will ask you for an iTunes stream or an RSS feed stream or whatever stream that you as the end user want to listen to. I like to listen to NPR. I like to listen to BBC America on my Echo. And so I have those streams, as well as HealthcareNOW Radio, obviously. I have those streams in my AnyPod list, so that at any time I can ask Alexa, Alexa, play This American Life. Alexa, play HealthcareNOW Radio. Alexa, play BBC America. And so the applications are there to do it, because if you just walked up to your Alexa without this and said, Alexa, play blah, blah, blah podcast, trust me, it's not going to find it. So you have to let your smart speaker know as the end user, what it is, what podcast you want to play. And then you have to, as a podcast publisher, you have to educate your audience on how to do that, how to find it. And it's very important that you do that. I sort of jumped over a slide here, because from eMarketer, not since the smartphone has any tech device been adopted as quickly as the smart speaker. All right. So in 2016, there were 16 million smart speakers in the U.S. By 2020, they're predicting 75 million. 75 million in a 3 to 4 year gap, dominated, of course, with Amazon. Now, Google is starting to make a play in this. The Google Smart Speaker is very reasonably priced, just like Amazon. Google, of course, is a huge household name. And there are others as well. The Apple HomePod has, much like the Apple computer when it first came out, the Apple Home, of course, is just probably 3 times as expensive as an Echo or a Google, and so it's just not as common. But they'll eventually make their way there. So the point is that smart speakers are huge right now. If you're on this webinar, you probably have a smart speaker or thinking about a smart speaker. Many homes have 2 smart speakers, and it's just how we're working in our home, listening in our home and in our workplace, using Alexa predominantly as a way to consume content, get information, and so forth and so on. So again, it's really important that as a podcast publisher, you understand that landscape and that you want your podcast to be found on Amazon Echo and Google Home, but there are things that you need to do ahead of time as that publisher. I would say smart speakers are having an impact on podcasting, and they will continue as it grows, and there's a demand for the user to listen to podcasts on their smartphones. Definitely the addition of the podcast icon, not just to the iPhone. Obviously, if you have an Android, there's a podcast icon, and other smartphones. But it was Apple's addition of the podcast icon a couple years ago that was a real game changer for podcasts. I mean, right? You got your new iPhone, and there it was. What's that? Podcast? Woohoo! Right? And just you just began to search, right? You searched on subjects or people or, podcasts of, hey, does Oprah Winfrey have a podcast? Oprah Winfrey does have a podcast, and so you're searching on these things, you're finding them, you subscribe to them, and then the beauty of podcasts and why podcasts have become so popular and so big is because it creates this push notification. And if you listen to any podcast, you know that you subscribe to a show that you like. And when a new episode comes up, guess what? You get a push notification on your phone saying, hey, a new episode is now available. And you're on your way. And it's this podcast icon on smartphones that began, if I remember correctly, probably in the 2014, 2015 window. Don't hold me to that, but it might have even been a little later than that. That's really what began to literally drive this huge rise in podcasts. Because it was accessible, it was there, it was right in front of the consumer, and it created this tsunami of the podcast world. As did the car, right? Plug and play cars, right? Voice technologies incorporated into cars. This happened as well, so another game changer. You can plug your phone. I have a phone. I have an iPhone, and I listen to podcasts, and I also listen to audio books. This is actually not my iPhone car screen here in this image, but it looks just like this actually. And so I don't, when I drive, I'm just not somebody per se that's going to listen to music. I like to listen to podcasts, and I like to listen to my audiobooks. And all I have to do is plug in my phone, and everything syncs up, and I can pick what I want to listen to, and I'm on my way. And this is the reality. You cannot buy a new car these days that doesn't have the ability to listen to audio technology. And interestingly enough, if you plug your phone in to if you're a relatively new car, you get a new car, you plug your phone in, and you could have 100 apps on your phone, but it'll pick up, it'll pick up your phone, it'll pick up probably Google Maps and messages and whatnot. You're sort of your standard, iTunes, your standard. If you have an iPhone, it's different if you have an Android or another smartphone. But it also picks up all the audio apps. That's why it's picking up podcasts and Audible. It's not going to pick up Facebook. Not the new cars I've looked at anyway. It's not going to pick up an app on your phone that is a visual kind of app, but it will pick up the audio technologies. It's a beautiful thing for podcasting. And so if you're with me at HiTech, and even if you weren't with me at HiTech, you certainly got a copy of the presentation. So there's an annual report that comes out from the Infinite Dial and Edison Research, and it's these insights into content consumption, media content consumption. And the last few years have really focused in on what they call spoken word audio, which is not, conversational technologies, AI-driven. Spoken word audio is sort of, audiobooks, podcasting, that kind of thing. And so the idea is that this is the new norm. Audio is continuing to grow and explode as a content media being consumed. And some of the things that they talk about is that 1/3 of the population reported listening to a podcast in the last month. That represents 90 million listeners. That's a lot of listeners. And both like podcasting and audiobooks are having huge reach these now as Facebook usage continues to drop. They can't say whether there's a correlation there. People are kind of, maybe they're tired of Facebook or whatnot. I certainly haven't seen that in the people that I engage with. But this idea of being able to play audio, and podcasting, obviously they're music audios as well, but to play commercial-free audio on your phone, in your car, on your media devices, on your smart speakers is incredibly appealing these days. No denying that. And I've pulled a couple slides from that presentation, and you can see, in this slide, this is the U.S. population, age 12 plus up, podcast listeners. I think it estimated that 144 million. I think this 51, I can't quite remember. It looks like I pulled it off. I can't quite read it. That might be a weekly number, but I'm sorry. It's 51% of the U.S. population, which is 144 million. That's it. So a lot of people. I mean, there's 350 million people in the U.S. And I talk about the number of podcasts listens to. It's a lot, right? People find their shows. They fall in love with the podcast show, be it music or talk. A lot of this is talk driven these days, of course. All the actors and actresses getting into it, and pundits and Oprah Winfrey's, and across all spectrums, including healthcare. And you kind of fall in love with your show, and you want to listen more. And so or you want to listen to others, or you listen to your recommendations that the AI technology certainly is giving you as a recommendation. So 7 podcasts per week in the last week. And this was the takeaway, one of the main takeaways from that research, that we're in a watershed moment, in a milestone in podcasting, with half Americans say they've ever listened to a podcast, and the medium is firmly crossed into the mainstream. All of that is true. All of that is true. All right. So in an earlier slide, I sort of referenced that podcasting is I always say podcasting is the new blogging, and in my mind it is. And obviously blogs by articles by thought leaders is still incredibly important, but that as a content marketer, or if you're in a healthcare organization like a hospital or a medical clinic or whatnot, podcasting is an incredible way to drive thought leadership and engagement. And there's a lot of reason for that. Obviously, podcasting is very accessible. Again, it's on your smartphones. You can get it on your smart speakers. You can obviously find them in podcast platforms and distribution places on your computer or tablet. So they're very easy to find. They're not gated. Podcasts are free, and so they're very accessible. The great thing about it, of course, is that the podcaster or the host or the company, you control the messaging, you control the content, you control what it is that you want to educate your audience on, and ergo that determines the audience, right? I mean, if your podcast talks about blockchain technology, which we have a show that talks about blockchain technology, but my point is, if you're somebody not interested in blockchain, you're not going to listen to a blockchain technology podcast, right? I mean, it's kind of a given. It provides a platform for you to establish a voice in whatever community that you're talking about. And of course, voice, there are studies that talk about the power of voice, how it builds a trust and a deeper connection. And a personality. Obviously, listening to somebody talk about have a high level conversation is different than reading about it, right? Reading an article about it. And you can use it to break the noise. I mean, there are a lot of podcasts. Podcasts are being added every single day, right? But there are way more blogs posted every day than there are podcasts published. Of course, blog articles have been around for a long time. And podcasting, much like blogging started sort of on the consumer side, the media side, the journalism side, and moved into the B2B space, and podcasting is the same trajectory. You know, podcasting, and that's no surprise to anybody. It's generally how things kind of work anyway. It sort of starts on the consumer side, and then you know B2B marketers figure out like, oh, we could have a Facebook page, or oh, we could have a YouTube channel, or oh, we could have a podcast show. It's really no different. And yes, there are over 600,000 podcasts out there, but there are 440 million blogs. So, and in the healthcare and health IT space, just because it's healthcare, it's just, you know, it's not this high, you know, health from a consumer standpoint. There are a lot of podcasts and blogs, you know, healthy living, healthy lifestyle, blah, blah, blah. On the B2B side, you know, certainly on the health IT side of it, it's still a pretty untapped market, which is great. You know, that's a good thing. Even on the hospital side, it's a, you know, for hospitals who are doing podcasts, it's a very much an untapped market. So most marketers know that even today, just doing blog articles is just not enough to advance your thought leadership message. You know, people are looking less at websites, and if they're looking at them, they're generally many times looking on their smartphones at the website, so they're not really reading. There's lots of information out there. I won't bore you with it, but click-through rates are down, click-throughs for email campaigns are down, time spent on websites, all that's down. And, you know, just because people are walking around with their little handheld computers or talking to their smart speakers, and they're just getting their content in a different way. So as a content marketer, we all know we have to widen our circle beyond, you know, just articles or even getting media mentions and earned media in the journalism side of it. And of course, podcasts are evergreen content, right? It's great. You can they're distributed through channels like SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They can go on a company website, a corporate website, and it's a pretty easy thing, low bandwidth to do that, low bandwidth, low cost, to get your podcast published and distributed in all the big players out there in the podcast publishing platform, a la iTunes. You can grow podcasts through SEO techniques, and I've listed a few of them here and what they focus in on. And actually, iTunes is going to be changing things here in a little bit because of they've got some issues, and those issues maybe aren't related so much to podcasts, but they are related to the iTunes model in general, which asks that you buy 99 cents, right, to listen, or a bigger amount if you want to buy the album. And they're having a hard time now with, you know, with subscription-based models, Amazon Prime, Pandora, you know, that kind of thing, where you pay a subscription and you get all your music or podcast or talk for free. So there's going to be some changes in iTunes coming up, and I'll keep you posted. The Google Play shows descriptions. You know, you can embed your podcast on any web page. That's pretty ubiquitous on any publishing platform you choose for a podcast. And so then you can take highlights and transcribe the audio to create a long-form blog post for that SEO value if you want. And then, of course, you can have if you have guests on a podcast, you can have them publish it and link back to your site to create SEO value from the backlink. All right, so we're going to look at a couple use cases here real quick, and then I'm gonna introduce you to my very special guest. I sort of went through, and I just wanted to show you guys that all across the healthcare and health IT spectrum, people have gotten into podcasting, and I've just pulled out some examples. So I'm starting to see hospitals get into this. You know, the Mayo Clinic did it pretty early. Texas Children's Hospitals, they do a great podcast the video and podcast actually, where they share stories of these precious children dealing with just horrific health challenges, and they're very uplifting and enlightening, and their audience obviously responds to that kind of thing. CMS, our own loved and beloved CMS, they have their own podcast show called CMS Beyond the Policy. It's really great to hear CMS take these very, very complicated policies and programs and put it into a podcast. It actually makes it more accessible. So I encourage you, if you're in the healthcare space, to find that podcast. Find all of these on iTunes. Two Docs Talk has been around for quite a while. It was kind of an early podcast. I've been following them for a long time. They do a great job, as does Good Nurse, Bad Nurse. So nurses, we've been watching nurses. We have our nurses now on HealthcareNOW Radio. We've been watching nurses for quite a while now, the last 4 or 5 years, and they were very early adopters in the podcast space. There are a lot of shows from the nursing community doing podcasts. This one particular show has 37 episodes with 84,000 plays. That's like 2,000 to 3,000 plays per episode. It's an amazing following. And then we have Payment Matters, and Payment Matters is an example of a health IT company that started a podcast. And I'm going to now introduce and to talk about Payment Matters is Dave Anderson. So Dave Anderson is with Anderson Interactive. He is the founder of that agency, and in the health IT space, he and his team work with companies in the healthcare and health IT space. So Dave, I'm going to invite you on to talk about this use case for the podcast show Payment Matters real quick, if you can.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Carol. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been great. It's been really exciting to kind of start this with Instamed, their Payment Matters podcast. This is really just starting the second year of it. We started out with Instamed doing, the typical media relations and social media and speaking ops and awards and that kind of stuff. But they wanted to really expand on how they're using their voice, how they're getting their message out there. And, we kind of turned to developing this podcast. We're just doing it right now, just a monthly podcast. It's really just that 30 minutes a month. But we've really gotten into a great rhythm with it. Jeff is, working with a great marketing team there that really helps him, pull everything together, setting up all the different guests and really aligning the schedule so it works really well with Instamed's, ongoing messaging. So, when they're lining up things like their annual survey or preparing for the annual user conference or HIMSS, we're setting up those guests so they can really kind of convey everything that they're focused on. Yeah. And they've been able to use it in just a ton of different ways. So not just using it on the Answers Media side and HealthcareNOW Radio, but really have gotten a ton of leverage on it through social media networks and email blasts and streaming live on their own site and creating blogs around it. Actually, just at their user conference a couple months ago, we turned it into an actual session where we had.
Oh, that's right.
Jeff, yeah, Jeff was on stage with his guest.
Right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
But yeah, they kind of turned it into a must-see event for it. So it was kind of fun, pulling that together with them. But it's been great.
Great. Thanks, Dave. If you guys, anybody out there, if you got a client that you'd like to get more information about in the sense, or talk to Dave about what he did with Instamed and their podcast show, you can reach him at his email address. I'm sure he'd be glad to share. So this is what we're talking about, the show Payment Matters with host Jeff, Lynne, and the work that Dave has done to launch this show and podcast for the company Instamed, and what they've done to increase Jeff's exposure and really put him on the national scene with the podcast show. There are challenges. I'm a very positive person. Anybody that knows me knows that I am not a Debbie Downer, but there are challenges. And my guess is the challenges that I'm going to review here real quick are ones that you've thought about if you've not gone into podcasting. And while there are challenges, there are opportunities. And so I'm gonna talk real quick about the ones that that I hear from the people that I work with in creating podcast shows. And you've probably thought of all of these, and some of these might be stumbling blocks as to why you haven't started a podcast. But here are the 5 most common that I on a daily basis talk to companies about. While it's a low investment, it is a higher brain power investment. It takes time. Creating a show like a Payment Matters or what CMS did or Texas Children's Hospital or Good Nurse Bad Nurse or Two Docs Talk, none of that happened, in like a 15-minute brainstorming session. There's a investment in time to create a concept and to get it recorded and get it the way you want it and get the thought leaders time, get them on point, get that messaging across. All of that takes brain power investment that a lot of companies and organizations will say they just don't have. Every good or great podcast show has a POV, and sometimes that POV is just the host itself. Like, I mean, if you're like Oprah Winfrey, you're a brand in yourself. Michelle and Barack Obama are going to start a podcast. They're the brand and they're the POV. But for those of us who aren't famous, sometimes it can be difficult for a thought leader in an organization, a company, to think, well, what is my point of view going to be? And they think, oh, what topic do I have to cover? Or, what angle am I going to take from this? And there has to be a point of view, because people fall in love with the show's host or hosts, not necessarily so much with anything else but that. They want to hear what they have to say about something that interests them, right? And sometimes, you'll listen to a podcast and the topic's not of interest to you, but the hosts were, and then you become interested in the topic, right? So it can be difficult sometimes in an organization or a company that has many thought leaders, how to determine what that point of view is and settle and stick to it, right? Sometimes what I hear, especially with the larger company organization, is, they just want to cast too wide of a net. And my point is, if you want to cast that wide of a net, you need to have multiple podcasts, right? You don't just have one podcast show, have multiple. Frequency is also a challenge. You just can't do a podcast show and say, oh, well, I'll do one this month and then take a month off, or 2 months and do another one. Frequency, just like social media, is the key to gaining an audience. And, we say, even for us, the bare minimum is monthly. Like, that is the minimum amount of frequency that you should be looking at, that more is better. You should be publishing a podcast of your show as often as you can on a regular frequency and cadence, so that I, as a subscriber, get my notification on a regular basis, right? Because keep in mind that that's what happens. People subscribe to podcasts and they get notified when a new one is published. And so, you want to get your messaging and your thought leader out there on a pretty regular basis in order to grow that audience. Another challenge is distribution. So, when you get into podcast publishing, you're going to pick a distribution platform. It's just as simple as that. It could be Blueberry or Libsyn or SoundCloud or Spreaker or TuneIn, or they all have them, right? They all have them. iTunes, by the way, is not a podcast publication. It's a publication platform. It's a distribution platform, rather, not a place to actually create and publish a podcast. You do that actually on these other podcast platforms, but then distribution becomes an issue, right? Because it's not a build it, if you build it, they will come kind of thing. I've had these conversations with podcasters, companies that do podcasts or tried it, and they put it on their website, and maybe, they published it on the platform, they put it on their website, and they got like 4 or 5 plays per episode, right? Or 20 plays per episode. Very disappointing. You're a large company especially a larger company with a bigger brand, and you get 20 or 30 plays for your podcast. You have a distribution problem. And so it can be a challenge to figure out the ropes of distribution, how to get into, how do you get into 45 distribution channels for your podcast? How do you then market that? How do you tell people, going back to my smart speaker, you have to educate people how to find your podcast on an Amazon Echo, all that takes work and time and effort to figure out. And then ROI, it's like, what's the ROI here? I've invested time with this thought leader, putting this podcast show together. Podcasts are by nature, you should never gate a podcast because it's like a it's like a YouTube, right? The nature of it is that it's free and open. I can search for it. I can get it on iTunes. And so marketers go, where is the ROI in here? Because it can be difficult to measure. These are the 5 most common challenges I talk to with clients and potential clients on almost a daily basis, and they're legit. They but they can be overcome because there are opportunities that outweigh the challenges. One is that this is the time, like the market really is ripe. Podcasts are the new blogs, and you got to get on board, and you got to get on board now, especially in the healthcare and the health IT space where there is plenty of room. Trust me, if there are, I say HIMSS only because I was at HIMSS, like everybody else in the hospital side or health IT space a few months ago. And, 1,000 exhibitors. There are not 1,000 exhibitors there who are doing 1,000 podcasts. There just aren't, right? A few of the big health IT vendors are, like Cerner comes to mind, Greenway Health, Allscripts, and a few others. But it's very, 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 very small percent, right? So this is the time to get in this market if you're in the health IT space. If you're on the hospital side or the provider side, the clinic, obviously your listening audience is for the most part very localized unless you're a huge health system. And so even your market is right, because it's not like you go into the local market. I live in the Phoenix area. It's not like I can, find podcasts from, the hospital that I want to go to or the doctors that I go to, and I want to hear their stories and what they're sharing. It's just not happening. So this is the time. It's in its infancy in healthcare and health IT. That's when you need to get in, not 5 years from now or 3 years from now, but now. Ease of entry, it is easy to enter into the podcast landscape. It's probably easier, the easiest way I would say, if done right and marketed correctly, to get a national voice for a thought leader. And I say voice literally and figuratively. So it can be done, and that ease of entry I would say, could be even easier and even more worthwhile because you have this evergreen content doing podcasts and even trying to get these sort of national speaking engagements. Competitive, it's like I said, there's still a few very companies doing this, and so it's a great time to get into it to get some sort of competitive edge, especially as you look at your POV, your point of view, and you create a niche where you can have these big these worthwhile discussions. Again, you cannot be everything to everybody. You cannot be the all in and all be in one podcast, but you can take a particular subject and expertise, and you can, which is even better, just from a hashtag and keywording, and create a sizable audience following to that show. From a marketing cost, the dollar spent to gain an audience is incredibly low. I mean, incredibly low. The cost to publish a podcast is cheap. It's based on bandwidth. It could be $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 a month. So the heavy lifting is educating your audience on how to find you and how to listen to you and how to tune in, right? That's where the marketing really comes in, and putting that thought leader ahead of time. But from just a pure marketing cost to do podcasting is almost nothing compared to what it would cost just to do a trade show, right? Or fly somebody to speak nationally, or do an e-blast or do a webinar. It's just, there's no comparison. While it's not gated, you can measure ROI, as Dave alluded to this, through social media. The increase in social media that they've gotten with this attention from Payment Matters, and number of listeners, and the host and audience engagement that you get as you put these podcasts out in all these distribution channels, or you work with us and we'll distribute it for you, market it for you, right? But you can do it on your own too, through LinkedIn and through Twitter and through, you can actually put them on YouTube as well. You can create the long form content as a blog article and have the conversation going as an embedded MP3. So there is ROI. It's just not that like, oh, I'm going to gate this and download it and get it. It's much like doing, corporate videos on YouTube if you want, or speaking engagements, that kind of thing. And then, of course, finally, a podcast show allows your thought leaders to shape the conversation, right? In their voice and who they have as guests, or even if they have a co-host, or even if they're a standalone, they are shaping the conversation around their perspective, their POV, and their expertise. So let them shape the conversation. It's very hard to shape, I think, harder than ever these days to shape a conversation with articles, right? Or earned media, because it's hard to, there's no sustainability to that. They're one-offs, right? They're one-off interviews, or they're in essence one-off articles unless they have a regular column. But a podcast show is a show, right? It's not a one-off podcast. If you're going to commit to podcasting, you're going to do episode after episode after episode. You're going to create a show and frame that conversation, and that's the real value in pushing a thought leader. We have time for some questions if we've got any, but I want to leave you with a final thought here, all right? I love that kitten. People still use, obviously, tablets and computers at home to consume media, right? And to consume content, whether they're articles or videos or podcasts or whatever. But what's really happening, where the real growth is in smartphones, and now even really exploding on the scene are smart speakers. And so you've got to bring your thought leader content to the places that people are consuming content. That's obviously a very obvious thing to say, but you can't forget about it. You can't leave it out. And how are people consume this? Reading an article on an iPhone from a thought leader, or listening to it on Amazon, how is that going to work? People can actually obviously read an article on their iPhone, but do they, right? Do they go through the trouble of thumbing down to read a 1,000-word article on an iPhone? Do they? Do you? That's my question. That's my final thought here. Think about your thought leader, your messaging, the conversations that you want to shape, and what device that's going to happen on, how that's going to be consumed by the consumer. I've put some resource links in this presentation. I'll get it out to everybody, and stuff about us, or how to stream us, how to get involved, how to engage with us. And then obviously, if you've got some questions, which you do. Oh, yay, thanks. Okay, let me just go through a couple of these questions, and then I'll leave you with my contact information. Yes, I will make these slides available. No worries. Hi, Carol. Hi, Stacy. Analytics. So that is a great question. So analytics is a problem. That's a problem, and that's part of sort of that ROI challenge conversation. So if you have a podcast and you distribute it in I'll say a Stitcher or Spreaker or iTunes, and you can pay for a premium distribution, and they will give you analytics. And what those analytics entail, though, it's not like you can say, this person who tuned in was a C-level person at a hospital, or was a physician from a medical clinic, or anything like that. But they will tell you things like, obviously, region. They will tell you, you can get analytics on where they were listening to your podcast, which we look at it all the time. Like, we're beginning to see, for example, Spotify has become like this really popular place for people to listen to our on-demand shows, right? So what do? Well, okay, now we want to do more education out there to our audience of followers to say, hey, catch us on Spotify, so the people on Spotify who don't know, or they can hear us on Spotify, can find us on Spotify, right? So it'll tell you where they're listening, where they're consuming your podcast, and which becomes even more important as you start. I mean, we put our podcasts in like 45 or 50 distribution places, right? It's huge, right? And some of them are incredibly small. Some of them are very large, right? iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, that kind of thing. So it's very helpful to know where people are consuming your content, right? To be honest with you, for us, the biggest place is on their iPhones, and we see that in our analytics in SoundCloud, which is our primary place to do that. There are some analytics that will give you on iTunes, especially they'll give you for podcasts like gender, and they will give you age, and they may even give you income. I can't remember. So they're kind of and demographic where they reside. You know, what region or what part of the country. So those are basic analytics. But again, you're not going to know like exactly who that person is, much like YouTube, right? You know, if you have a YouTube video, you know how many views you get, and you can sign up and get some basic analytics, but they're not going to say what your title is. I don't know how many people at work have a smart speaker. I know that they're starting to see that a lot of people who have one smart speaker have two. They'll buy two, and again, some of that is because they're super cheap. They become really cheap. So it's easy to have a smart speaker at home, and then you get one from work, or you have two at home and one. And that infinite dial talks about the number of people that own multiple smartphones. From a Google search SEO standpoint, what a lot of people are starting to do with their podcasts is they take the podcasts and then they get transcripts for them. And there are applications that will get a transcript, and then they publish the podcast content as an article and then embed. And so obviously as a long form article, that is from an SEO standpoint much easier to SEO than per se a podcast, because that podcast is a standalone audio file. But it can be done. And it takes time. It just takes time. We think about SEO and searchability, but you know, our whole thing is frequency, because that's really what drives the social media side of this whole thing, right? I mean, and it drives the algorithms in places like iTunes and Google Play and these other platforms where you publish podcasts, because the more, it's just like anything, if the more you publish, the more these distribution channels like iTunes and Google Play and iHeartRadio, whatever, the more you publish, and when you publish, you can keyword and provide descriptions and all that for searching, right? They then create more recommendations for you. You get more subscribers. They then, it's that 6 degrees kind of thing. You get more subscribers, and they say, oh, iTunes says, oh, you're getting more subscribers, you're getting more ratings, you're getting more likes. We're going to start recommending your podcast to more people, and that's really what happens. And so, the SEO value of getting your podcast found in Google, it can be done. I mean, if we search on all of our shows as a podcast, they all come up because they're on our websites, and our websites are open. But that searchability that happens in like iTunes, right, or even Google Play per se, or iHeartRadio, is a different search value than searching on a search engine like Bing or Google. And there we go. Dave, I want to thank you. We're just about out of time here, and I obviously want to thank the attendees. I will get a copy of the slide and the recording out to all of you. I appreciate your time today. And Dave, thanks so much for joining us real quick to talk about Payment Matters. It's a great show. Continue the great work that you guys are doing.
Anytime. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I hope you have a great day, and enjoy the slide into the weekend.